There's a particular sound metal makes when it doesn't just break, it screams. And if you've never heard it, imagine a steel-jawed beast suddenly realizing it bit into something alive and angry, like the woods themselves were yanking back. And believe me when I say that sound traveled through those pines like a warning shot from nature itself, sharp enough to snatch the breath right out of the morning fog. A grinding howl, a crunch, and then silence, the kind that hangs in the air like a held breath, until it shattered all over again with a string of panicked yelps and one man shrieking. It went through my foot, voice high enough to chase off every squirrel in a 4-county radius. And that right there, was the moment the Pine Brook Ridge HOA patrol discovered the spike strip my grandpa built for boars, because yes, we live in a place where wild hogs are a bigger threat than unhappy neighbors, or at least they used to be. But lately the danger wore khakis, carried clipboards, and smelled faintly like discount cologne and self-appointed authority. I was sitting on a fallen log, cross-legged, chewing through a bowl of granola and rainwater. Yeah, rainwater. Dad calls it rustic. Mom calls it a hazard. I call it breakfast. When that scream split the forest open like a knife. Dropped my spoon, grabbed the binoculars, and sure enough, just past the tree line, there it was, a gray Ford F-150 with Pine Brook Community Enforcement decals slapped on the side like they were starring in a knockoff suburban cop drama. Only this episode opened with one dude hopping on one foot like a deranged flamingo while his buddy shouted into a radio with the enthusiasm of a middle schooler trying to order pizza for the first time. And look, if I sound calm about all this, it's because chaos in these woods isn't new. Not if you grew up here. Not if your family's been rooted into this soil since before somebody with too much money and not enough imagination decided to slap down beige townhomes and call it preserving natural living. Grandpa Hank appeared beside me like he grew out of the bark itself, silent as dawn, steam curling from his army-engraved thermos, eyes squinting with the kind of judgment only old men who've seen too much can wield without saying a word. We watched that security guy spin in circles holding his foot, and Grandpa took a slow sip, exhaled like satisfaction had a temperature, and it was black coffee warm, then muttered, "They crossed the line again." And when Grandpa says line, he doesn't mean metaphorical. He means literal, a boundary, a history, and a warning, and they stomped right over it like it was a lawn edging instead of land held by decades of sweat, boots, and a certain degree of well-earned paranoia. He grunted, sat down next to me, boots planted like roots spreading through the soil, and added, "Didn't even get to the bear pit. Amateurs." Then he tapped my shoulder. "Tell your mama to warm up the bat. Softball season might come early." There are families who host barbecues, and there are families who reinforce perimeter alarms and teach their kids the difference between deer tracks and HOA men's loafers. We are proudly the second kind. See, here's the thing. That patch of forest wasn't some random campsite or quirky woodland getaway. This place is home. A strange, stubborn, chicken-powered fortress built by the hands of a man who retired from a government job no one's allowed to ask about. And no, that's not a joke. We stopped asking after the Thanksgiving he quietly mentioned classified swamp operations, then changed the subject to stuffing like nothing happened. We've got rain collectors, solar rigs, underground storage, a compost throne we call royalty, tree houses like a childhood fever dream, and Gerald the emu. Won in a poker game in '98. Half guardian, half demon, hates pants, hates trespassers more, and honestly might be the real sheriff around here. This camp has survived storms, power outages, wild animals, and one incident involving an over-curious raccoon and a homemade battery bank. But what it hadn't faced until recently was the Pine Brook HOA. A group of townhouse warlords who decided that our land, our trees, our freedom somehow violated their community aesthetic, which is HOA language for, "We want what you have, and you better smile while we take it." But our land predated their beige boxes by 40 years and an entire history of sweat and stubbornness, and the deed, handwritten by a park ranger in '72 on a napkin, says so. And before you roll your eyes at napkin deeds, let me tell you, every real story starts messy, and every real man signs paper with dirt still under his fingernails. HOA didn't care. They had bylaws, golf carts, a taste for power, and fancy maps printed by someone who never walked a mile in boots. Grandpa responded the only way he knew, with truth wrapped in defiance. A dead squirrel, the Constitution around it like a ribbon, and a note that read, "Come and pluck it." They did not find that funny. We did. The squirrel didn't have a strong opinion. Then today happened. Metal screams, foot skewered, radio panic, and Grandpa smiling like nature just gave him a high five. Down the hill, the guy with the radio spotted something worse than steel spikes. Gerald emerging from the brush like an emu Terminator sent by Mother Nature herself to avenge boundary violations. He dropped his radio and ran screaming, and Gerald sprinted after him, squawking like Satan's kazoo. Grandpa leaned back, satisfied, and murmured, "Always goes for the ones with soft hands." Most kids grow up watching morning cartoons. I grew up watching men in tactical vests sprint from a legally ambiguous bird. And I know what you're thinking. This all sounds wild, ridiculous, maybe even dangerous. And yeah, sure, but let me tell you something, we didn't start this. We never asked for a war. We asked for peace. We asked to be left alone. But when someone decides your land is theirs by paperwork and arrogance, when they think rules written in a carpeted conference room can uproot decades of boots-in-the-soil history, you defend what's yours. Sometimes with lawyers, sometimes with fences, and sometimes, if you're Hank, with boar traps, jars of glitter, and an emu with the soul of a Viking berserker. Today wasn't the first shot. Wasn't the last either. It was a warning. For them. And maybe for us too. Because lines were crossed, traps were sprung, and something bigger than a punctured foot just started rolling. The forest felt it. We felt it. Even the sheriff probably felt it in his donut before he got the call. And as the birds returned, wings cutting through the quiet, I finished my breakfast, boots planted in mud, heart steady, and thought. They came into the woods thinking they could take something. They're about to learn the woods take back. The sheriff showed up around noon, which honestly surprised no one, least of all Grandpa, who already had a pot of coffee on and a metal folding chair set at the edge of the clearing like he'd scheduled an appointment for law enforcement right after the chaos and before lunch. His cruiser crawled up the muddy trail, wheels slipping, engine whining like it regretted ever being assigned this district, and when he stepped out, ducking automatically like he expected arrows or flying emus. I swear even the pine trees sighed in sympathy. He stood there squinting at the shattered HOA truck down the hill, the spiked strip glinting like a medieval smile, and the trail of muddy, glittery footprints leading away like breadcrumbs left by a panicked toddler. He cleared his throat. "Morning, Hank." Grandpa tipped his thermos. "Sheriff." A beat. The rain dripped. Somewhere, Gerald rustled ominously. You, hear anything about an incident?" Sheriff asked, staring hard at the sky like the answer might be written up there in cloud handwriting. Grandpa shrugged. "Heard screamin'. Sounded like a city boy discovering nature." Sheriff exhaled through his nose the way people do when they're trying very, very hard not to say, "Why does this always happen with you people?" Well, the HOA called. Again. Said one of their patrol trucks was violently assaulted by anti-community sabotage. Grandpa raised an eyebrow. "Mauled." They said mauled. Sheriff corrected himself, rubbing his temple. I leaned on a stump, arms crossed, watching like a kid at a nature documentary about bureaucratic predators who wandered too far into the wild. Mom came up then, pan in one hand, sling in the other, face still streaked with flour like she'd paused mid-biscuit to respond to potential war. She looked at Sheriff, then Grandpa, then the destroyed truck. They crossed onto our land. Again, Sheriff nudged a pine cone with his boot. "Yeah, I kind of figured. But they're demanding I cite you for something because they think this is some kind of militia compound." Grandpa took a slow sip, eyes unreadable. "Militia has paperwork. We just got chickens and a bird with anger issues." The sheriff stared down the hill, and right on cue, Gerald appeared from the brush like a feathery omen of violence, feathers puffed, eyes burning with the fire of 1,000 HOA violation notices. The sheriff flinched. "Control your bird. He's self-governing," Grandpa said. Sheriff backpedaled so fast he nearly slid into a puddle. "Look, some families have golden retrievers who greet visitors with tennis balls. We have an emu who serves eviction notices in the form of psychological warfare." Sheriff eventually retreated, clutching his donut box like a peace treaty, muttering about just wanting one normal county, before he drove off with his dignity hanging by a thread and his rear bumper by a zip tie. And for a moment, things went quiet again. The kind of quiet you never trust in a story like this. Because enemies that feel embarrassed don't disappear, they reorganize. HOA boards don't lose face. They reload it with indignation and a legal pad. And sure enough, by sundown, Mom spotted the first drone buzzing above the tree line, smooth and black and smug, like a Silicon Valley mosquito sent to film our sins. It hovered. It whirred. It scanned. And then it got smacked out of the sky by a slingshot rock courtesy of Beaks, who hooped like she'd just won the Super Bowl, scooped the mud-covered drone up, slapped it on a wooden spike at the gate, and stuck a sign under it that said, "No fly zone. Trespassing toys will be recycled." By morning, 3 more drones showed up. One had a speaker screeching, "You are in violation of Code 712, unauthorized modification of terrain." Grandpa snorted so hard, he nearly dropped his coffee. Modifications? We've been blowing stumps out with homemade dynamite since Nixon. They're 24 years late to that party. We knocked them all down, BB guns, slingshots, pure rage, and lined their twitching plastic bodies along the property line like a macabre garden fence of corporate shame. And if you think we stopped there, you misunderstand both our family and the way pride works in rural America. That night, Grandpa gathered us around the camp table, his face lit by lantern glow, metal bits and springs scattered like we were about to build a moon lander instead of weaponized prank traps. "Booby Trap 101, he declared. "Today we defend this land the traditional way." "What tradition?" I asked. "The one I just made up," he said. "We wired soap slick patches across the trail, hung a net rigged to yank anyone into a pile of pine needles, set up a glitter cannon that'd stain souls, and strung a goosehorn tripwire that sounded like a medieval war horn crossed with flatulence and divine punishment." Mom sighed the sigh of a woman who once dreamed of a suburban kitchen island and instead ended up training in guerrilla slapstick defense. "This isn't a medieval castle," she muttered. "No," Grandpa replied, adjusting a crossbow he swore was strictly ornamental. "It's older." He meant it too. This wasn't about property lines. This was about legacy, identity, belonging, land as memory, as history, as proof you were here before anyone printed a pamphlet telling you how to live. But HOA wasn't done. The next morning, a cream-colored envelope floated down from a drone like a passive-aggressive wedding invitation. Final warning: 72 hours to vacate, unauthorized occupancy zone. Grandpa laughed, marched into the shed, returned with a dusty typewriter and squirrel hide envelope, and wrote his reply. "Declaration of Forest Sovereignty. 3 points. We're not moving. You're trespassing. Our emu has been trained to attack khakis." He signed it. "General Hank, independent territory of not your damn business." We mailed it back in the most dramatic way possible, tied to Gerald's leg like he was a hostile carrier pigeon. By then the HOA had split into factions. People who wanted us annihilated. People who thought we were folk heroes. One man named Steve who just wanted to walk his dog without being chased by birds or bureaucracy. Drone raids intensified. Patrol guys upgraded to buzz cuts and tactical cargo shorts. Grandpa started naming them like they were wildlife. Mallard, goose, weak ankle ferret. Mom finally put her foot down. "We need proof. Real proof. Paper. Maps. Records." So she headed into town with Beaks, while Grandpa paced the perimeter like an old war general waiting for the last cavalry charge. And I watched him, shoulders a little tired, hands curled like roots gripping memories, and felt something shift. This wasn't funny anymore. It was, but it wasn't. The forest felt colder. The wind tasted like change. And for the first time, I wondered if maybe we were up against something bigger than clipboards and bad cologne. Because HOA wasn't just showing muscle. They were rewriting reality on paper, and paper, in this country, can bury people deeper than dirt ever could. Grandpa saw it too. He stood still, staring down the hill at those shiny houses, those straight sidewalks, that fragile, curated, vinyl siding empire trying to swallow the wild. "They think a fence defines a boundary," he murmured. "But land remembers who walked it first." Lightning cracked in the distance. Storm rolling in. The literal kind, and the kind with legal seals and drone eyes and men who didn't know how to survive a single night without central heating and HOA approval. We weren't just defending space anymore. We were defending the right to exist the way we chose, on dirt, in trees, with stubborn hearts, and one emotionally unstable emu. And as thunder growled across the ridge, and that first raindrop hit our roof like the start of a war drum, Grandpa tightened his hands on the porch rail and whispered, "Get ready. They're done asking." That storm didn't roll in. It attacked, swallowing the treetops in sheets of rain, so heavy it felt like the sky was trying to knock the whole forest over just to see what shook loose. The wind came sideways, thunder cracking so close the ground trembled, and everything in me said tonight changes something, like the woods themselves were warning us to breathe quiet and stay sharp. I was on watch next to Grandpa when it happened. A flicker of movement where there shouldn't be, a shimmer of slick rain gear slipping between trunks, boots whispering over soaked pine needles, and the soft mutter of men who think the dark is their ally when really it's just waiting to embarrass them. I nudged Grandpa, and he nodded once without even looking, old instincts sharpening his posture like steel cooling in a forge. 5 figures. Dark clothes. Crowbars. Bolt cutters. No HOA badges now. Just the kind of men who think rules are only weapons if they hold them, and obstacles if someone else does. They came in right through the swamp edge, the kind of place only fools and beasts enter when the rain is fresh and the mud is hungry. They thought they were clever, avoiding our paths. They thought Grandpa forgot his own woods. They didn't know that old men don't forget where they bleed and build. I fired the flare, a streak of neon ripping through the storm, and the woods exploded awake. Trip wires snapped like angry violin strings. Speakers hidden in hollow logs shrieked with coyote screams, bear roars, and one disturbingly loud recording of Grandpa yelling, "Get off my forest," in a tone that could curdle milk and baptize sinners at the same time. One intruder tripped, fell face first into a muddy slope, and slid directly into a puddle that smelled like despair and fermented pine sap. Another hit a soap patch and flailed like a raccoon in roller skates. Another fell into a ditch and came up screaming with rubber snakes tangled in his jacket and pride leaking out his ears. And then, because fate loves a punchline, Gerald arrived. He burst out of the rain like a screaming demon wearing feathers and vengeance, eyes wide, legs pumping, chest-mounted GoPro blinking like a battlefield confession cam. The men scattered like bowling pins thrown by God. One yelled, "What is that?" like the woods owed him an answer. Mom showed up with a megaphone and perfect deadpan. "You are being filmed for legal purposes and potentially a documentary." Beeks was in the treehouse, firing off glitter bombs like a fairy godmother raised by pirates. Sparkling clouds rained down on intruders who were now slipping, screaming, and glowing like disco swamp creatures trying to escape their life choices. One guy tried climbing a tree, only to discover Grandpa buttergreased the lower branches months ago just in case. He slid down with a whimper that haunts me, directly into the compost pile. By the time they scrambled back past the boundary, soaked, humiliated, smelling like skunk-scent water balloons in fear, the storm went quiet, like the world paused to laugh at them before catching its breath. Inside the treehouse, our family sat dripping around the stove, adrenaline still buzzing like bees in our teeth. Grandpa peeled off his jacket, wrung it out, and muttered, "City boys don't respect mud. That's why mud wins." We laughed then, tired, punch-drunk, relieved laughter, until a phone buzz cut through. Jenna, her voice shaky, urgent, terrified. "You need to come to the records office. Now." They're trying to change the boundary, retroactively. The air shifted. All our traps, all our defenses, they stopped mattering in that second. Paper. They were moving the battle to paper. Mom and Beeks rushed out with every deed, photo, map we had. Grandpa watched the truck rumble down the trail, jaw tight, hands trembling just slightly, not from fear, but from the kind of anger only men who built something with their bare hands ever feel when someone tries to steal it with a pen. Morning broke muddy and pale. The forest was steaming, dripping, breathing again like it knew it survived something ancient. Then the news vans arrived. It started with a leaked clip, Gerald chasing intruders across mud to classical music like nature and chaos had collaborated on a ballet no one asked for, but everyone loved. Reddit got it. TikTok got it. Cable news got it. Overnight, we weren't forest weirdos. We were folk heroes. People mailed snacks, handmade signs, a crocheted emu. A former HOA board member turned whistleblower dropped documents, proof they tried to erase us, replace our woods with luxury eco-retreat experiences For people who think camping means a $900 heated sleeping pad and matching Sherpa mugs. The county hearing wasn't dramatic. No yelling, no slam dunk moment. Just a slow, quiet collapse when officials realized our deed was real, the HOA lines were not, and publicly siding against the family now loved by the internet was career suicide. They ruled. Our land equals legally ours. HOA equals retract boundary, issue apology. We laminated that apology and nailed it to a tree next to Gerald's coop. It reads like a hostage note written by someone forced to swallow pride and HOA bylaws at the same time. The traps came down, one by one. Glitter cannons retired. Nets turned into hammocks. Spikes strip mounted at the gate like a relic. But not all defenses vanished. Some legacies shouldn't. Gerald still patrols. Grandpa still keeps a slingshot in his back pocket. Mom checks county records twice a month, like people check weather. And me? I sit on that same fallen log most mornings, watching sun push through the branches, feeling the earth breathe under me, knowing every inch of this place isn't just home. It's proof a family can fight the machine and win without turning cruel. Sometimes, neighbors wander up, nervous and curious. Is it true, they ask, about the traps? The emu? The glitter? We just point to Gerald. He fluffs his feathers, tilts his head, and lets out a sound that says respect the land or lose your dignity. Grandpa carved a sign and hung it at the entrance. Roots don't move just because paper says they should. And under it, in crooked letters we painted together, boundaries matter, especially the ones you fought for. If you've ever lived through something like this, if an HOA, a neighbor, a boss, a system tried to shrink the space where you get to be yourself, tell me in the comments. Were we right to fight like this? Would you have done it too? And what's the wildest thing an HOA has ever tried on you? Drop your story. And hey, if you're watching from the woods, give Gerald a wave. He sees you, and he remembers faces. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your HOA war stories. The crazier, the better. Because somewhere out there, another family's fighting for the right to stay rooted. And maybe your story gives them courage too.